Good evening. Don't know if anyone recognizes that, but that's actually the start of Pictures Exhibition by Modest Mussorgsky. So anyway, hello, welcome. I'm here. I'm Will Deakin. I'm going to talk to you for a bit. The plan for this evening is to talk a little bit about some stuff I kind of did over Christmas, New Year, what I jokingly called in a blog the Merry Name. And this is this is the blurb. So there you go. Last year, the ORR published a bunch of data. There's quite a lot of different train movements and passenger movements involved in that. I then took that and then did some other stuff and drew some pictures. I then put it on social media and it kind of got a bit silly. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about how that worked. I seem to have got transcription going, which is annoying me. So I'm going to stop the transcription. Anyway, so there you go. Here we go. So I'm going to look at how we did the data. I'm going to talk a little bit about myself and my experience, and then talk about a little bit about where we can go with this and why I came up with this monster over London. Anyway, so there you go. This is me. This is Leeds Digital Festival, and welcome to you to the talk. So who am I? So I'm a kind of a bloke who's been doing sort of stuff with technology for 25 years. I kind of started off as a physicist, didn't do very well at that, and then learned to program and have done various jobs. I kind of work for Network Rail. I'm in the trains portfolio, which I can bore you with at some other juncture. I do some European stuff. And as I say here, I use data science at night to think about things about where people might want to go on trains. I've also done a bunch of talks. I think this is the third year I've been at Leeds Digital Festival. I did something when Sheffield had one, and then I occasionally give talks to slightly unfortunate postgrad students or at the Leeds Institute for Transport or here in Sheffield where I live. I did an interesting talk about some of the IT in the railway, the infamous TOPS and how we might want to fix it. So, but that's not the topic of today. So where did it all begin? There you are, me eating some toast in a physics lab back in probably 1990. So background. So part of the reason the interest, and it seems I've got some kind of cut through, is an interview I did following the social media. So I'm going to go apply the approach of a sort of French modernist, which is there will be a start, a middle, and an end, but not necessarily in that order. And this is kind of sort of loosely based around the blog post and the interview I did with Bloomberg, which, as I said, has kind of had more cut over than I thought. And this is a quote from the Bloomberg piece. So there I am Deakin. I collected several open data sets, and it claimed that over a weekend, I managed to draw this kind of super map. And it goes on to talk about it. There's a little bit more to it before and after. And so this is about kind of explaining where it came from and where I've taken it since. So a lot of this is about parasocial interactions, otherwise known as hanging around on the internet. There's a number of people here I already know through, I don't know, the danger of Twitter and X or other pieces, and please reach out. Previously, I'd done some stuff with there's a bunch of files that the Network Rail publish, the National Sectional Appendix, and within there they've got some gauging tables. There's another talk. I talk about that a little bit, and rather than having in PDF, I turned them into CSV. And then what this kind of started off with is back in December, there's a guy I know, Alistair, who also happens to live, and he kind of spotted that the R had published this data, had put it out there, and had started drawing some pretty jazzy pictures, but it didn't really kind of do it for me. So I then want to kind of delve back into my original, I mean, how I kind of got into data visualization. So having kind of spent 15, 20 years working in IT, I kind of ended up at sort of a management level. And I wasn't really doing anything much in the technical space. So I thought it would be interesting, probably about 8 years ago, to reach out. And I came across a guy called Stuart Lowe. He's at, well, I mean, it was the Open Data Institute, became Open Innovations, and they were based over in Monroe House in Leeds. And he'd done this post about a road called Garth. Apologies if you heard this before, but this is the one joke. And it kind of looks at this place, and there's kind of a lot of places called Leeds in there as part of that. Anyway, for part of my life, I grew up in a small village in mid Wales, and it was quite close to a place called Garth. And I moved when I was about 12 or 13, but my sister, who's a bit younger than me, actually went to the local primary school, which was in Garth, Irvine Valley County Primary School. And it kind of, this Garthy talk made me think of the a kind of a Welsh idea of longing, hiraeth, a kind of a yearning for a place that never really existed. I mean, it's kind of like an idea of, I don't know, heimat or home. And then when I looked at this, interestingly enough, so where we're looking now is somewhere kind of north, no, between Brecon and Glendrindod, and the actual town of Garth isn't there. So I was kind of like, well, that's an interesting one. So where's it gone? And it's because it's roads, and it was called Party On. So, well, you know, the obvious thing to do if you've got a map of Garth is to do a map of Wayne. And so, in tribute to the work of the Open Data Institute Leeds, I produced a global mapping of Wayne's, or Wayne's World. Anyway, I will resist any more attempts at humour from now on. So as you can see, I can span all the genres, to quote Howard Moon. And so one of the early things I did is I took a bunch of data and a bunch of population data and started looking at public transport time. It was a really interesting data set. It was a piece of data that was done as a research project, and I've not seen it since. So there's kind of like a 2014 cutoff, and then it stops. I've looked at census data, station location data from the National Passenger Transport Access done and done visualization. I became familiar with things like super output areas and some of the stuff that happens around this. And then the previous one, I was the medium super output area travel data. So each census, they actually produce a data set where they have a kind of an where they actually publish kind of segregation. And I did a visualization, and it's out there, and it was kind of roundly ignored. And similarly, they do an intra unit, and part of the thing is that didn't really work it for me. I mean, basically just having kind of a set of lines which you can click on that tells you between one random middle super output area and another didn't kind of necessarily scratch the itch. What then also happened is, again, you know, saw a tweet, and a chap, Gary Keenall, he's a well-respected engineer, a passionate advocate for rail electrification, hence his 25 kV tag, kind of came up with an idea of why don't we try and tag the OpenStreetMap data and do something with it. Well, I'd done some scraping, I've done a few bits and pieces, so I kind of got involved. I can't say I was particularly instrumental, because his idea of Gary's is that there's a problem with data that we've got on the railway, and I'll come back to this theme several times, where you can't get hold of tagged data around the electrification state of stuff. And there wasn't necessarily a good idea about where we've got data related to a map of the railway. So why don't you take the OpenStreetMap data, which has got a reasonable set of railway data, and then add the meta tags around your electrification? And he came up with this, and I thought that was pretty cool. I kind of did some suggestions about how you can pull the data off OpenStreetMap. The Wayne bit, I actually took a global extract of the raw file and then filtered it locally, and it's about 32 gig. It took over a day to run and probably wasn't my finest IT hour, but it's kind of more brute force over smarts that did that. I mean, and here you can see various things. So you can see the limited electrification, the obsession with the bridges of third and fourth rail in the south of England, and large parts of the country that haven't been electrified. I then did a project, so, you know, welcome those that saw me at the last talk, where I started talking about trying to build a large European network, and as part of that, I extracted all of the rail network from OpenStreetMap and did a similar piece. And if you notice, I mean, there's still the green tags in the south of England, and that's about it. So, you know, this kind of third or fourth rail DC is only ever used there or in metro services. So again, once again, the unique nature of the British Railways. So yeah, passenger flow, origin and destination matrix data. This is where we started. So I knew, and I believe one of our attendees today was actually instrumental in this. There was a freedom of information request made to Network Rail to publish centerline track model. It's kind of been an open data source that's been talked about for a long time. I'd access to it. I'd seen this kind of spray map, and I thought, well, you know, why don't I just take the centerline track model and do something stupid with it, and then try and make it more so rather than just being a kind of a point-to-point straight line, I could probably do some sort of routing. I've been playing around with some of the routing algorithms that you get. Again, all of my stuff's developed in Python. I wouldn't say I was very good, but again, it stops the imminent onset of loss of cognitive function. So my aside about open data. Open data is really important. This is actually an extract, and so there's a cuts specifically. So there's the Open Rail data site, which takes the OpenStreetMap data and kind of renders it. And this kind of shows you where you've got high-speed rail. I think it's pretty cool. There's Britain, and there's the railway map. And using that kind of thing, part of the work that I was doing is I then took some data from population census and then tried to pull together an idea based on a spanning tree map where actually where would I actually put a high-speed railway. The talk's out there. It's on YouTube. I'm going to plug my own wares if nobody else. And it just talks about that. But this is where, outside of the talk, we're kind of looking at these kind of open data. There's this kind of idea of freedom of information data. And as part of that, the centerline model had actually been released. And I kind of tried to look at various angles with it. So one of the projects I've been looking at was kind of looking at, and it also has various different layers onto that. So it kind of had an idea of a track segments. I was able to then take other data that's available. So there's an operational reporting point called a stanox, which I believe is short for station number. And then because of the IT system, it had to have 6 letters. So they add an X to the end. And then what I tried to do is do a mashup of where you've taken centerline data and OpenStreetMap data and see how they mapped across each other. As part of that, I kind of came up with this. I tried to then look at areas. So I did a load of stuff using a hexagon set of maps. Again, another theme you'll see with some of my work is that I'm not such a big fan of squares. I'm more of a fan of hexagons. And I could kind of see where there was unique information from OpenStreetMap and the centerline model. And then occasionally it would abut. So kind of did some visualizations around that. And that's what it looks at a really detailed level. You can see, and one of the nice things about the hexagon library that's kind of used by, I think Uber developed it, is it's hierarchical. So it kind of has this idea of different levels and different sort of base hexagons, and you can go in more and more detailed levels. And then on the basis of that, you can start pulling together some of this stuff. So where does it begin? So are we in media res? So again, use the freedom of information track model to find the shortest path between ORR passenger flows. So the first thing is, what does the origin destination look like? It's a very, very large CSV file, common separated variables. For the original set, which is 1 year, 2018, 2019, there's 1.5 million lines. And it uses this idea of a computer reservation system or a 3-letter code, which is unique normally. So I'm trying to look in here. Can you see that? Ooh, have I done it wrong? Anyway, I think I must have cut that off. But yeah, you've kind of got origin, destination, station. It's then got a count of the number of journeys. It doesn't actually tell you the direction of flow. So it's unclear if you were traveling from Wick to Bodmin Parkway, which I'll talk about in a minute. I don't know if the person started in Bodmin or ended up in Wick or the other way around. So one of the areas I wanted to do, I mean, so where are these stations? So there is this National Public Transport Access Network Gazette, NAPTAN. It uses a thing called a tip lock, which is a timetable planning location. And it's possible to map those tip locks to the CRS codes using corpus data. Yes. So none of these things could be that simple. And obviously there were 6 wrong ones. So I kind of had to find a way to fix that, which I think I just did as a hack. The next thing about it is combine those and snap it to the central line track model, and then splits where you've got that to actually produce. So, I mean, these are the tip locks that I was talking about before. I've kind of got the CRS code. I can link it to that. I find the nearest one. I take the central line track model and I snap it to the, and then I do some tricks about a shortest path. And then on the basis of that, you end up with something that eventually looks like this. So for each of the locations, so LDS is the CRS code for Leeds, I could then look at trying to draw a shortest path algorithm between all of the other ones. And you start, when you add up all of the elements to something like this. And so there's kind of like about 2,579 stations with CRS codes. And on the basis of this, you could see the longest possible direct path is from kind of down here in, you can't see me. Why am I pointing at my map? I'm talking to people on the internet. Is from St. Ives, which is just sort of down in the bottom toe, up to Wick, which is in the top right of Scotland. Actually, and that's about, well, 1478 kilometers. If you take the central line track model and the shortest path, it's approximate. You would never take that on the route, but it won't be that far off. And what I found then is that actually somebody found from Bodmin Moor to Wick, which is brave. There was somebody who took a nice journey from the Glenfinnan over the Glenfinnan viaduct up into Scotland from Dorchester. I think this is one of the ones I've stolen from our friends at Bloomberg, where I think they worked out that was the maximum number of changes. I also found there's some other things. So if you wanted to go from Southend Central to Southend Victoria, if you went on the train, the route was like 100 miles. So it's about 500 meters apart. Walk. And there was a similar kind of loop around Dorking Deeperdene and Dorking Station. So yeah, there were some bits that just didn't make sense. And then some brave soul also took the Larbert Shanklin, which was 9 trains, a 10-hour trip, and a ferry. So brave passenger. So what I'd actually originally planned to do, and this just kind of gets into the sort of the social media side of it a little bit, is I wanted to draw one of these. So if you look at my previous piece, you could see that I'd done it for Leeds, but I actually wanted to actually look at the overall total and add it all up. But to do that, I had to do a process by which I'd kind of done a calculation for each of the CRS codes and then aggregate them after it. So this is the intent. What I'd actually done then is, I had to build one of these, and I thought, well, why don't I draw those two? Again, I had a bit of code kicking around that would do that. I mean, the main images, the nice clean ones, I actually used QGIS, an excellent open source tool. These ones I actually did, because there are these 2,000 pieces, I actually had to write a bit of Python to draw them, which is why the picture's a little bit different. So there you go. There's Euston. There's King's Cross. That's what we were doing in 2018, 2019. That's St. Pancras. If you live in Sheffield, you'll be familiar. And that's Watford. Sorry, no, Waterloo. There you go. And my goodness, there's a lot of people traveling relatively short distances into central London from that particular part of the network. And then it's kind of like a bit of a so what question. There you go. Golden Elsie in Berlin. So I put it out there, put it on social media. There you go. There's my 4 maps. While I was at it, I then had done this other thing. And then Alistair, the guy who kind of did the original post, said, "Way, ignore the main map, but hey, I've actually done this piece where any individual could look at their own station." And I posted this, I can't remember, it was sometime around I don't know, it was January the 1st or possibly January the 2nd. And then within a day or a day and a half, there'd been kind of like 500,000 people on Twitter kind of going, wow, but there were some wrinkles and I learned some stuff, and that's going to be part of the talk. So first thing is user experience is very important. Being me, and I kind of actually, I was originally going to do it as a table of 4. So as you can imagine, 2,500 people, if you kind of do it as a single row, it's quite a long scroll down, scroll down, scroll down. So I was going to say, well, just make it easier. But then I looked at my phone and thought that's a bit difficult. So I decided to go for 2, and I kind of asked around. It seemed to make sense. The problem with it is that a lot of people couldn't see the second column on their phone without scrolling right. And then they were going, this sounds great, but where is it? I then also, because I decided I was going to try and do something clever with really high res. I mean, so one of the things about it is a lot of the stuff I'm doing is portable network graphic. And it, when you're trying to look at very fine lines, you know, there's only a certain level of resolution. I tend to do it at 300 dpi because I found that works reasonably well. It's not quite print quality, but it's good enough. I find the kind of 72 dpi that you get on a normal graphic a bit fuzzy, certainly when you get into some of the stuff we've got here. But there's a limit to how far you can download and zoom it in. So I was going to do a kind of an SVG vector graphic format, but they're quite big when you're looking at this level of detail. So I decided in GitHub to use what they call a large files format. But what I hadn't realized is that there are actually quite strict limits to large file format sharing of data. One of the things that also came up was a request about the Isle of Wight, which I'll come on to in a moment, and a request about was the data open. So my advice is, if you're going to do something, unlike an old Git like me, remember people are going to interact with it on the phone, at which point one column really helps. And actually, I've done that. So I kind of had a chat with this because we were going, my God, where have we got to with this? And Alistair kind of said, you know, there was a load of, I mean, even then there was like 107 comments and whatever. And 90% of people just went, I mean, I wish I'd actually come up with this summary, but Alistair just went, wow, love it, unreal piece of work. Then 5% of people were going, my station isn't listed. And it was just literally because I'd got 2 columns. And it was just like, there was lots of, yeah, I'm really sorry. Go and look for the thing that you want. And then just on your phone, do that thing with your finger where you scroll to the right. And then there was some other stuff. There was this man's an idiot. He doesn't know anything about trains. How dare he? I would do this. And then there was another bunch of people who kind of went, well, you know, this is wrong because actually you haven't considered the detail of this. And my point about it, and I kind of was pretty open, is it was sort of, although I'd kind of got skills and expertise and sort of looked at it for a while, it was a hack. It was based on what I had at that time, looking at this and just trying to get something out there quickly over a couple of days when I was bored. I was off work. Christmas had happened. Weather wasn't great. Why don't I write some code? Yes. So this is my reaction to. So I think I'd gone back to work on the 2nd. I'd gone to York, and then I'd kind of gone for a coffee break, and then my phone was blowing up with the I can't see anything. And I just assumed it was people kind of going, they'd not scrolled right. But no, what had happened is that there's a file transfer limit, particularly on the large file format, and it blown up. So I couldn't actually host anything. So basically people were going along trying to look for their station and it wasn't there. So yes, the joys of cloud hosting. What I actually found weirdly, so I had a bit of a panic. I asked, you know, various people. I know Mr. Hicks, Peter Hicks, who's from Open Train Times, was kind enough to offer alternative hosting and stuff. What I actually found was that just by removing the large file limit and then reposting, it kind of went away. The normal file limits on GitHub, which is where I posted this, and I am a terrible, mean person living in Yorkshire, and I wasn't spending any money on the hosting of this, because the alternative would have been to say, well, this is a proper thing and maybe I'll just put some cash behind it, but I'm just too tight. And on the basis of that, I was trying to push the limits of what was acceptable behavior by GitHub, and I got caught. I mean, I actually managed to get it up and running within about 4 or 5 hours. Well, no, what time? I kind of got home about 6, and about an hour and a half later, I'd managed to do the kind of pull, flatten, push out, learned some stuff about the command line and GitHub, which I probably didn't. The large file interface is just ants, to be honest, but that's another story for another time. And then there's the Cambridge question. Yes, hell is other people. Some people from Cambridge noticed that quite a lot of the passengers from Cambridge were ending up arguably in Liverpool Street, and their point was that's wrong, and that people from Cambridge end up going into King's Cross, and that's fine. But the rules of the game were I was just taking the shortest path between the locations, and that was the shortest path. So and it got really quite personal. So it's the first time I've ever muted somebody on social media, because I guess I'm been doing social medias for a long time, back to bulletin board days even, and I've always tended to be quite good at just ignoring people. But this guy was kind of going, it started going into stuff about, this is a great visualization, but wouldn't it be so much better? And I was kind of going, well, read the rules. It's a hack, it's a model. And then going, well, I'd personally be deeply embarrassed. I'm not sure how I could look at myself in the mirror. And I'd like going, whoa, fella, this is going on. I've tried to answer your questions. I've explained how I've done this. And I just wasn't having it. But it was just like, fine. I mean, one of the problems with using the central line track model is, at that point, I wasn't able to link it through. There's maybe some stuff I can talk about in a bit where maybe that's a possibility in the future. But basically, there is no thought about train services. There's no thought about actually routing something that's according to the timetable. I know it's possible, and it kind of goes back to this XYZ 2%. This is a hobby. Did that. If somebody wanted to do it, take the code. It's out there. It's on GitHub. You want to saddle up and do that, fill your boots, but that's not for me. So, but I cannot overstate how important open data is around all of this stuff. And it's a two-way street. So the first thing is, for other people to use it, it's so much better. I mean, I was actually asked, I think I originally published under an Apache license, and then somebody said, can I release it under the CC 4 by deed? And actually I was. I mean, the only reason why I kind of go for Apache stuff, and there was a kind of question about why I changed it and not done with a really specific, I just think that I'd like to have acknowledgement. It does take a bit of time to do this stuff, and maybe I shouldn't be upset by it. I mean, as I sometimes say at work, plagiarism is the sincerest form of flattery. Equally, I don't really want that to be. I just, I do it as a hobby, but I'd like people just to say it came from here, and then I've done so much better, or it came from here, and this is why it's wrong. And so, and this is the current attribution. I've actually changed it, and I'll explain why I've done that a little bit in a minute. And then on the basis of that, so yeah, one of the things that I actually got asked is got to be really clear, because people like Wikipedia or others were saying, well, can I use it? And I said, well, of course you can. And they're going, well, if there's some bit which, any of the sources of information you got, we can't attribute to one of these open sources, then we won't. But again, the other point about it is that I'd use the freedom of information open rail data, and that would be released by Network Rail as an FOI request. Again, I need to mention Peter Hicks here, who'd done the donkey work on that. And without that, I would have been doing it with OpenStreetMap, which would have been okay, but there are some issues with OpenStreetMap. Whereas I think the FOI, and there's now been a release under the Rail Data Marketplace of the central line track model, or the network model as it's now called, under an open government license. And I think that's really positive. I mean, it's one of the things that I've been trying to argue quietly in the background for a while. And this kind of idea, just having been able to do this and bring this stuff together, I just think is really powerful. Sorry to go on about, hey man, open data, it's great in it. So yes, shadows appear on the wall of a cave. There's nothing like a quick quote, Plato quote. And then I kind of got asked to write a blog. There you go, within a week, and I did. It's out there, you know. It still stands. I mean, it's where I kind of got the title of this. I don't know if you were here earlier, so I did actually play an excerpt from um, Pe Perfume V by Pavement, which was going to be my original. She's got the radioactive. Um, so yeah, I mean, it's now over 500,000 impressions. It kind of slowed down massively, so there's obviously an algorithm issue, but yeah, it's kind of there. And just talk about that. And then as part of it, I got asked to do an interview by Conrad Quilty Harper from Bloomberg Data Visualization, which was, you know, actually quite flattering. Certainly for a guide whose job it is to assure technical designs related to timetable planning systems or operation systems. And one of the things that kind of came out of this is that there is disparity. And when we talked about it, it was about, you know, what does it show us? And this is this kind of idea of the monster that sits over London. I mean, again, I was talking to Alistair, and we kind of said, well, my God, what does it look like? It looks like a kind of Cthulhu elder god sitting over London that's squatting over the whole of the UK. And I think that was about right. So yes, and but it is over London, and there's a kind of a bit that I'm going to touch on in a bit around whether that's right. Anyway, so here ends the first lesson, and that's kind of where I got to. So kind of like mid-Feb. So what next? More data. What was interesting is that about, I don't know, 4 weeks later, 6 weeks later, and maybe if I was really organized, I should have this in my notes. The OR then published not only the 2018-19 data, they also then did the full set up to 2022, and then shortly after published the 22-23 data. And that's interesting because it starts also being able to make some, you know, you can then start having a discussion about COVID. So if you look at this, and the way that I decided to do that is I kind of revisited and actually opened. So rather than I actually then registered and then started using the Rail Data Marketplace properly. There's a bit of a barrier to registering it, but if you're interested in data, I'd really recommend it as a source, and it's becoming increasingly important. And as part of that, I then decided, well, how do I represent this? And I kind of had various discussions, and I just went for an animated GIF. So basically, I repeated the same thing. I do that rather than just for the year. I kind of did an individual station for each of them, and then you can then do this. And here's the one for Leeds, and guess what? Here's the one for Garth, because of course I wouldn't ever knowingly miss out a really bad joke. You can see not many people travel to and from Garth, but as I said, you know, so that's so if I just wait a second and look at this, you can see there you go, 2018-19, a bad year, a marginally better year, and actually a significantly better year. And I'm really looking forward to seeing where we've got to with 22-23, sorry, 23-24 when that comes out, because I think it could actually show us that we're very close to where we were before. Anyway, so one of the things I tried to do was to actually try and draw some stuff around writing deltas. And so I kind of took the high water mark, and where it's green, that's where the high water mark is. And then you can see the kind of pattern here, and where it's red, it's not doing so well. And there's King's Cross, and wow, that's a big difference. And then what's interesting, if you look, there's a lot of drop off in the kind of southern section, but actually kind of north of Peterborough. But on the King's Cross, there are actually some green shoots going back into 22-23. So if you look at the section from Peterborough up to Scotland, it's now slightly bigger than it was, but I didn't think that really nailed it in a clear data visualization way, so I went away to think about it. So then there's the then what, and the then what was the plan. There you go. So why don't I draw a nice visualization and then take the beaching report format and see what we've got there? And I kind of did. There you go. Similar format. Here we go. Nice bunch of visuals, and here's a comparison of 2023 with the original beaching report. And it shows actually there's a lot more network, but actually there's in some places more people taking the train than were even back in the when the report was done. I mean, I've scaled it. What actually happened then is life happened. I kind of just lost the mojo, stopped on Gen X, and probably did a speed run for the next month in May of Fallout 3. I'd kind of bought the game for £4 and then thought, well, why don't I go and have a post-apocalyptic nightmare type experience of going around shooting zombies, which was fine, but all good things must come to an end. And then, you know, people started kind of going, well, what about this? So I kind of started doing so. This is if you take all the population in Britain and then try and draw a gradient where people live. So there's a lot of people living on that line east-west round, but then there's quite a lot of people living sort of a bit to the south and a bit to the north, and not many in the middle. I also took the challenge. So somebody said, what's the squarest country in Europe? And it's Poland. And then as a counter to that, so if that's the squarest, then obviously the hippiest is the one with the largest height to width ratio, and it's Sweden. There you go. Who knew? Poland is the squarest country. Sweden is the hippest. And that's kind of where I got to. So I'm in a better space now. I've got some work in progress. So one of the things that struck me is, that red line difference piece wasn't very effective. But what happens if I try to do something around actually building some kind of regression map? So what have I done? As it's me, I've gone and taken a whole bunch of hexagons and I've spent a lot of time, and I've actually started doing some things where I'm actually trying to scale the hexagons. So where you've got the hierarchy, I'm actually trying to get in between sizes by doing a zoom or an anti-zoom, a reduction. And then on the basis of that, so 400 is a quarter the size. So it's based on a kind of a numbering system based around the reciprocal. Anyway, doesn't matter. And this is where you kind of look, and actually that's not good. That seems to have got skewed. But anyway, this is where people live. So I've got the population data and I mapped it across there, and that's where people travel. You're kind of going, okay. To go back to that point about paucity, at the moment, I've only managed to do this for, I remember kind of introduced the kind of concept of an intrazone. So these are people who are just traveling within that hexagon, within all of the stations within that area. So as you'd imagine, there's quite a lot of people. So, but the population distribution on that, it's a H3 grid scale 3, where I've then artificially scaled it. I've then gone and done a piece of work where I've taken a simple linear regression. So not only have I taken nerdy hexagons, I've also applied data science. Who knew? Anyway, so as part of that, as you can see from this, there's a piece here which is the regression, and it's about 80%. But what you can see is that if you look at that model, there is a difference between the current state on the right hand side and actually what a simple linear fit based on fitting a machine learning model to the data. I've then also applied a fancy histogram gradient boosted trees regression. So if you look at some of the libraries, and again, it's quite nice. I mean, I'm quite happy sitting there going through 47 different regression models that are available in Python and then fitting them and looking at them. And again, you see, so if I look at that, there's actually a slightly less good fit, but generally across all of the data. And again, you can see a pattern. That would suggest to me that possibly somewhere around Manchester is looking a little bit underserved. What I now need to do is to build that network model on top of that and then start looking at passenger flows. Didn't get it done before the deadline, I'm afraid, but I'm going to hopefully post something. And then I've done a similar thing, but with a slightly different set of scales. So this is it's a similar piece, but with a different kind of scale grid. So again, you see population distribution, you see passenger travel, and again, the linear regression again seems to show, well, Birmingham seems underserved. The kind of conurbations in and around Manchester and the kind of northern cities. And the reason for doing this is to say, well, is there any kind of mass to this? And I think there is. But let's see. Let's see where I get to with that. But it's kind of my current hobby. And just to say, without this, without the Rail Data Marketplace, I kind of wouldn't really be able to do this stuff. The Rail Data Marketplace is also there's been an excellent piece of work done by some of my colleagues at Network Rail, looking at actually passenger numbers based on phone pings. And to make sense of that, they've done some brilliant work actually answering that Cambridge problem. So they've actually mapped where people need to travel. So maybe my holiday project this year is going to be to try and unpick that. Maybe I'll do something better, or maybe I'll do something completely different. I don't know yet, but that's kind of where I've got to. So what? So why am I doing all this? This is, I think, Evelyn Pankhurst. There's a statue in Manchester, and it has the words, which you probably can't make out, deeds, not words. So the reason why I'm kind of passionate about this stuff is about emissions. I mean, there's a conversation you need to have. If you look at transport emissions and total emissions, this is where we got. So we've got a reasonable story in this country about halving our emission level. I think we've done even better. The data I've got only was published in 2020. But if I then look at the transport segment across the bottom, it's not changed. And what's worse, I mean, you can see cars and taxis, you can see HGV. So if we're going to do anything about it, that's just kind of a summarized version. And actually, aviation is also a bit of a curse here. So if we're going to do something about it, we need to look at the decarbonisation of the transport sector. And to do that, I think we do need to start leaning heavily into active travel, looking at alternatives to car travel. And as part of that, I see rail, both in terms of passenger rail and freight, as being a key part to that. So we need an integrated public transport strategy, even a fully automated luxury high-speed railway. But is it going to be enough? Anyway, I'm sorry, I've kind of whittled on a bit longer than I expected, but if you're still there, I'm open to answer questions. If anybody's got any thoughts, I then will conclude with a few final bon mots and then finish. I don't know. So do you want to put your hand up? Do you want to shout? Do you want to ask me a question? Do I need to pick on somebody? No, sorry.
Hi, Will. Can you hear me?
Yeah, hi. How you doing, Xander?
Thanks for the really good talk. It's really interesting, and it's been really good fun seeing you occasionally post these stuff that you do in your spare time. Incredible visualizations. I had a couple of questions. The first one was about the Cambridge problem. Do you have a rough feeling, vibe for the delta between the true path versus the assumed paths? I mean, I'm presuming the majority of the time, shortest distance paths are usually roughly about the shortest time path, or including the issues with people choosing routes that are actually longer but have less changes, or take less time, or cost less, or have better frequency.
And I think that's where this other data set that Shaveen and his team have just pulled together is absolutely, because he's actually taking pings on phones. I mean, so just from family experience, my wife doesn't like crowded trains. Okay, that's fair enough. And would prefer to take a slower train rather than a faster one. And so I think there's so much more, but that data only became available on the Rail Data Marketplace probably about 6 weeks ago. And with a day job and a family, I've not really had an opportunity to kind of like delve into it. But yeah, I mean, I think the part of it is that there's so much more you could do with this. And one of the things that was interesting, that I actually set up a call with the guys. Sorry, that's a gender neutral, guys. I need to be careful. I mean, my daughter tells me that's okay. So the point about it is there's a lot to go at there, but they hadn't really thought about the train service piece. They were thinking more about it. You know, their focus is very much about safe passenger transit at stations, which, as you also know, is possibly a slightly hot topic. But let us swiftly move on from that. And as part of that, and I said, well, you've just mapped all the train services per hour. So they kind of broken it down into hour segments across a week. And they went, I've not thought about that. We were only interested in passengers. So one of the other things I'm going to say is the big benefit of open data is that, the imaginatively challenged like myself can just take that and do something different from its original intent. And I'm kind of show that is, there's the centerline trap model, which is meant to be actually is originally designed for allowing the yellow plant, the yellow bananas to go through and measure the track. On the other hand, using that, you can then do this stuff. Sorry, it's a bit of a rambling answer, but yeah, there's a lot more we could do. I mean, the other thing is I did actually look into it and found that weirdly, a lot of people from that area. So no, I'm going to remember it's Norfolk. No, it's not. It's Norwich. It's so you've got we're actually traveling into Liverpool Street because that's what they would do. There's a kind of a quirk of Cambridge. So if I looked at the numbers, it was a bit wrong, but it wasn't as wrong. It wasn't completely wrong. And as I said, it's a model. There's a load of assumptions. Here are the assumptions. If you want to improve it, but it's that kind of to make it better, I'd have to do 5 times as much work, and life's
sort
too
of an
short.
80-20 rule situation.
Yeah.
I guess. But leading on from that, what is generally Network Rail's open source policy at the moment? Is it open source as default, or is it more push at the moment?
That is our stated policy, and I can refer to that because I was involved with some of the discussions around that, and it was part, I believe, of our control period settlement. So we've agreed with the regulatory authorities that that's our default. However, culturally and organisationally, that's challenging, and it also, I think, probably goes doubly so for many of the operators. I mean, because they've got a commercial or currently have commercial sensitivities around some of this stuff. So I think there's some kind of challenges we need to unpick. But yes, as I understand it, and I was asked to comment on it, the Network Rail policy is default open by default, unless of course there's a good business reason. So we kind of have a kind of idea of classification of official sensitive, and then theoretically we have secret. But what do I know? I don't have any secrets. Official data is available through FOI, and the reason why stuff's official sensitive is because it's GDPR, so it's stuff to do with people and identifies them, or it's stuff that we need to hold on to because it's related to commercial sensitivities. I mean, we don't necessarily want to be publishing all of our contracts, certainly during bidding, or it could actually be shown to have a direct impact on safety. Out with that, the policy should be just to publish the data out.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I suppose that the last question for me is to do with going into the future. I mean, I know you've played around quite a bit with looking at ideal networks, about what a real network could, from ideal sort of base upwards, what it could look like. I suppose that'd be quite interesting to compare against then the real world begin-end journeys to give it a bit of an idea about what areas of the network are underserved or under capacity in any of these other kind of moves. I mean, I know, for example, Tom Forth did a couple of posts looking at the Leeds area and about the number of seats on trains, which is a bit tricky because you've got to know what trains are running against the timetables on what sections of track. But there's definitely some interesting ideas there about.
But I think with this data set, this I've got to remember the acronym, which is going to escape me. But with this new data set with the network ping, it's actually possible to do that now. I mean, the data's there. It's just, as you can imagine, it's huge. And I think that's going to be the next. It kind of feels like I've kind of climbed all the mountains in Britain, and I've kind of got a European trip on my hands, sort of a bigger mountain. I mean, but also, I mean, I like a nice theoretical one. My background's a physicist, and let me tell you about a spherical cow in a vacuum. I mean, it's great,
Yeah. No, I get that. So you'd be climbing an Alpen mountain then, possibly.
Yeah, I'm going to need to get my Alphorn sorted anyway.
Yeah, sounds good. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Will. That's really interesting.
Okay. Has anybody else got any other questions? Go on, Henry.
Yeah, so I was wondering more around like how you built this. I know you mentioned Python and kind of like the architecture around that, and also if you've got like a GitHub repo or if you've made that kind of like your actual build
Oh yeah,
available.
no. I mean, so all of the code. Sorry, yes, absolutely. If you go to the site that's linked through, I actually all the Python code that runs and all the download stuff is actually on my GitHub. So if you're prepared to sit there and put up with my shonky coding and have got patience and enough compute and enough time, you should be able to. And if you can't, shout. So all I'd done is I'd kind of taken the GitHub and then put all of the files that I generated running a run script. So it's a shell script that then runs a whole series of kind of Python scripts or bits and pieces. I think there's a few bits and pieces you need to download yourself from RDM, the Rail Data Marketplace, because they don't have an API currently, although I know some people have been asking for that. So yes, I mean it's all there, warts and all. I mean I'd say I have been paid to code. I wouldn't say it's necessarily my yeah, I'm a research coder rather than a coder in production. But yeah, absolutely. So my tag is anisotropia, but with the last A is a 4. In the notes that I'll send out, so I am going to send out the slides. I will send out this. It's there, but yeah, if you look out for that, I'm definitely available for a kind of download, and it's strangely enough been one of my more successful repos. I mean, so some people like my scraping of the gauging tables through PDF. Other people like the stuff that I've done to draw pictures of the railway. And then what happened is that I basically did a markdown file which was automatically generated with a link to all of the PNG files or GIF files with the animation in it, and it just kind of works like that. So yeah, it's out there. I just warn you, it's not that beautiful, but it works. I've tested it. If it doesn't work, shout and I'll fix it.
Did you use component tests? Like, did you test it all, or were you just like, oh, I just want this to work, and then you saw the visualizations and you saw what you wanted, and
I do test it. I mean, actually, I do quite a lot of linting and some other stuff to kind of make it look robust. I don't follow a formal testing piece. I don't write test scripts. That's not the way I do it. I'm sorry. I'm old school. I'm seat of the pants. I then look at it and do kind of. I mean, okay. My setup is I I set up local Python environments with a requirements file, and I hack in Emacs. So I would not recommend this to anybody who is sensible, but it happens to be. I mean, some of my coding experience goes back to the 90s, using Unix systems. I've done some C. I did some Common Lisp, which is kind of why I like Python. And there's a whole conversation I could have around Peter Norvig and some of the stuff. So yeah, I mean, I've kind of got a path less traveled approach to a lot of this stuff. But yeah, I mean, I do a lot of testing as I go along using an interactive loop, but I don't formally test it, and I don't do that kind of integration testing stuff, which is, you know, but it's just me. So I get to I don't think I'd get a job as a coder these days, is all I would say.
This is like impressive, like what you built. And the final question would be around like, has anyone asked you about like using AI to use this data to predict future like travel patterns? Because I know you mentioned earlier in the presentation about Garth and looking at the Viking kind of history behind where people are traveling in the north around Leeds, like that from a historical perspective. That's interesting. I think, you know, seeing people still traveling to Viking areas and
Yeah.
you know, that kind of thing. Like, have you thought about like ever using AI and then creating a map, a potential map for like the next 3 years, for example?
I hadn't, and part, I mean, so there's kind of like two parts about that. So the first one is passenger travel dropped off a cliff, literally, as I think I've shown during COVID. So, just speaking as a scientist, you need a good set of data to be able to make a prediction. So, I don't know, trends is your friend. So I think that's why I'm really interested to see what happens in 23, 24, because I think it's starting to settle back. I mean, and I'm quite nuanced about terms like AI. So those predictions, so arguably the use of a histogram based algorithm for regression is actually a form of AI. It's a predictive model. It's just I'm slightly squeamish about, don't know. I mean, okay, I digress. At one point, a shortest path algorithm. I mean, if you go back to the history, and then this is kind of me doing some stuff in Common Lisp. Arguably, the A star algorithm, which is the shortest path algorithm that was developed at the time, was seen as AI. So one of the issues I've kind of got just with the term, and I'm sorry for just my kink, is the idea that AI is basically the newest sexy technology, and then once it becomes boring, it becomes called that, it moves on. So I'm happy to have an exploration about an algorithmic approach to make predictions. I'm just slightly loath to kind of lump that into the AI bit, but yeah, I'm using machine learning techniques based on the scikit-learn tool set. That really is ugly code to try and get that to work. I mean, I kind of looked at a whole different, but I'm kind of interested in the approach, and so the multivariate regression fitting, which wasn't really. I mean, this wasn't meant to be a kind of delve into my nerdery. Was actually based around what could be technically known as AI techniques. They're certainly machine learning, and there's some other stuff I'd like to do with clustering and some other stuff, and but yeah, I think that's a really good idea, and it's sort of something that crossed my mind. But again, it's a hobby. I'll do the next thing that mildly amuses me. But no, good suggestion. Thanks for that. Okay. Any other questions? Otherwise, I'm sorry, we're slightly over time. I will close with a few final remarks. Cool. Thank you. No, thanks for that. Those were really good questions. Parting words and a man in Fox hat. Build it and they will come. I believe, although this is kind of a matter of faith, that significant investment in rail will make a difference to the problems we're seeing today. Data is awesome, and so as is my want. I will. There's a play, Rossum's Universal Robots. I quite like this. There's a mate of mine who's from the Czech Railways who actually sent me. There's a song, which is the timetable song. So it's in Czechoslovak, and it's something you have to hear once in your life. Anyway, so Rossum's Universal Robots was this play about these kind of androids that were taking over the world, and as part of that, they have a toast to the timetable. And the problem with it is one of the challenges, and this is something I do need to do more and think about more, is the data is actually so. And here, I'm afraid, is Goddess sing the anger of Achilles, Peleus' son, the fatal anger that brought countless sorrows and sent valiant souls to Hades. And that's my daughter wearing a squid. Why don't we have some high-speed railway? I mean, I kind of shown that it's lacking a bit in the north. And this is the big but. Is it enough? Thank you very much. And on that note, I will close the call. So thank you.